Hey everyone, Cahlen here, and I just thought I would do a video on my thoughts on vampires. So, no one's asked me to do this, but it is something I actually think about quite a bit. And so just to give you a preview, yes, I do think vampires as fairly close to what we understand vampires to be in terms of fiction, right? If you think of a fictional vampire, yeah, I think that it's sort of like that. That's actually a real thing, right? And so I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I want to first point out that vampirism is basically taking life or energy from something else in order to sustain yourself, right? So everything living that I know of on this planet is vampiric in a certain way, right? So I will eat the bodies of plants or whatever I'm going to eat, right? I'm going to eat the bodies of other living beings, and in order to stay alive and to stay healthy and thriving and feeling good, right? So that's basically vampirism. Now, there's different places that you can get your energy from, right? So plants is kind of like this middle place where it's like, okay, plants definitely feel pain and fear and things like this. Like, this is pretty well established in the science. So we should not fool ourselves to think because we are vegan or vegetarian that we aren't hurting something or killing something, right? And causing it to suffer. I think that is still happening with plants, right? But it's a better situation than factory farming, basically enslaving animals, feeding them poison, injecting them with poison, and putting them in the most miserable conditions for their entire lifespan. Steal them from their parents, all these things, right? And then you murder them and then you eat them, right? So that is a very heavy karmic cost to pay to take in that energy. So I don't want to accrue that level of karma, and I don't even really want to accrue the level of karma that I get from eating plants, but I will, right? Because I prioritize staying alive and feeling healthy, right? So basically we have to recognize that we can have these ideas of like, oh, let's not, like natural law, let's not do harm to others, but it's like, well, at a certain level, it is natural for things to take from others in order to survive. And even someone like Mark Passio has said, it's been a while since I've heard him say this, but my understanding is he said, in a survival situation, he would, of course, eat a squirrel, right? And Mark Passio is a strong vegan for moral reasons, and I respect him and I agree with him. But also he says that, if in a survival situation, if I need to kill a squirrel and eat it in order to survive, I'm going to do that, right? Because I value my life, and more importantly, he values his mission, right? And that's important, and yes, he'll sacrifice the squirrel to do that. So at some level, even the most extreme but still reasonable people will say, yes, of course, I take life in order to sustain my own. And so, back to kind of the scale of things, right? There's the, murdering other things, and then, of course, even worse, enslaving other things for their entire lifespan, and then murdering them, right? There's natural hunting, and then there's livestock, and then there's, plants. And I think at a certain level, yes, that is karmically, there are consequences, but there are other places that we get our energy from. And the body can adapt. It takes the body a long time. You can't just jump into a new mode. You have to get the body used to it and teach it to take in other sources of energy more and learn how to recycle the resources that you was usually getting just normally because you were eating so much. Kind of have to move into a more recycling mode, and that takes time for the body to do that. But there are people who basically can go weeks without eating or drinking just because they can absorb energy from what's around us, right? And their body is able to keep recycling the things that are more material, like certain sodiums and potassiums and glutathiones and all these types of things, right? But so it can recycle a lot of those things. And then if you can get the calories, or rather the energy, from another source like the sun or from the earth, and actually you serving as a circuit, like basically a wire for that energy, the earth energy and the sun energy, to connect to each other in a circuit, that is basically charging you up like a battery. That's how we charge batteries, is we hook them up in between two different things that want to have energy flow between them, right? And then because you're in the middle, you're like, well, I'll be the conduit of this energy, but also I'm going to take some of it for myself and store it in my body so that I can use it later, right? And also you're getting a lot of the things, all of the things really that you need to make proteins are in the air. I think all of the things. There might be one thing that's not. But anyways, basically the air actually has a lot of the things that we need to make things for the body. So anyways, the point is you can get to a point where you basically are taking in from the environment, but in a very, very, very minimal way, right? Most of it's coming from the sun, and sometimes every once in a while you'll eat some things. And when you get closer to a situation like the sun, where it's like the sun is just spewing out life energy. No one's making it do that. It's just, here you go, universe, use this for whatever you want, right? It doesn't lay any claim to this energy. You're not harming the sun by absorbing it into your skin, right? It's probably a situation where that's kind of what the sun wants to be doing, like going off and do weird things and getting absorbed in all kinds of different situations and fueling them and having little adventures, right? So anyways, you can get to a point where there isn't really any karmic consequence, even though you are still a vampire. But maybe not so much in that case, because you're not actually taking it from something which would rather you didn't. So maybe it's better to, because we kind of think of vampires as bad. So maybe it's good to define vampire as it takes life, which everything does, but it takes it from things which don't want that to be taken from them, right? So the sun wouldn't be vampirism because the sun's not really worried about it, right? So anyways, that's my definition of vampire in the general sense, but yes, it does get down to a certain level where something very much like what we see in movies is actually true. So you have to understand biology and stem cells and genetics. Basically, you have stem cells which can turn into any type of cell in your body, right, depending on whatever the electromagnetic frequency is going on around in the situation where they found themselves. So if they're next to a bunch of skin cells, then it's in an electromagnetic situation where it's like you become a skin cell, and so the stem cell turns into a skin cell. So anyways, this system allows us to basically infinitely repair ourselves, right? Now there are other reasons why we age, besides just this, but stem cells have a limit to them. They can basically do it so many times, and it doesn't seem to be necessarily specific to the cells themselves having replicated so many times and then they can't replicate anymore. It's almost like there's something broader with that DNA set, which is basically we can only reproduce ourselves a certain amount of time, and then, it's time to go. It's just biology for this planet, for this species, for lots of whatevers. So anyways, even if you were able to continually make your own stem cells, you would still eventually, that system would begin to fail, and you would stop being able to create new, perfectly young, like baby, child, teenager type cells. So that's, and that's going to lead you to death eventually by itself. And that seems to be the hard limiter for us. There's lots of other things that we can do to improve our lifespan, but that seems to be the hard limiter. So anyways, that is a limiter even for people of very high knowledge and high technology. And so they have to come up with other ways to get around that. And one of the ways that they can do that is you can take stem cells from a being which is very, very young, right? And so this is the whole idea behind child sacrifice. This is the whole idea behind, basically Planned Parenthood type situations. Sorry, that's basically what's happening. Basically, it's been set up in an agreement. People will, if you take this baby away from me, then you can have all of its juiciness, its pristine stem cell, right? So then you can add that to yourself, and we can add stem cells from other people, even other species, to our own body, and they have that youth of whatever that thing was. So you basically can become a chimera, and we all are chimeras to a certain degree, but a vampire, like in the traditional sense, is someone who knows about this and processes the blood in a certain way. There are people who, of course, will directly drink blood, and I think there is some benefit to that. But I think that actually the technology that they've got going on here is much more advanced than that, and they actually refine this stuff to make a more perfect purified substance, which they add to their body. And basically, they sort of are incorporating your DNA and your cells, like at least you in terms of what your body is. They are actually causing your body to exist inside of their own body, right? And so then they'll get that from lots of different people, right? And so basically a vampire becomes, I don't know, schizophrenic or something like that. They've got lots of different ideas in them, right? So for example, there are stories of people who got heart transplants, and when you put the heart in the other person, and then the other person dies, right? The heart transplant, obviously, person died, right? Where the heart came from. So then this new person has all these memories and emotions from the other person's life, right? So if you're drinking the blood, if you're incorporating stem cells in large amounts from another being, then you incorporate that into yourself. So if not only do you want someone who is very, very young as absolutely possible, hence abortions, right, that they are of good stock, because first of all, there's just the DNA itself. Is it good DNA? And then there's the memories and the emotion and the beingness of a person, which develops the longer that they're, right, the longer that they've lived. So I guess, another reason why they would want a younger being is because it has less of that to kind of interfere with the vampire's generally already ongoing situation, right? It's the child's essence is uncontaminated with many memories of anything, right? And so it just kind of comes in clean to the vampire. So anyways, there are people on this planet and across the universe who basically subsist in this way, and this is one of the reasons why humans are basically a livestock animal on this planet, and humans are of course smarter than cows. So the fields in which we graze have to be much more, complicated and interesting and believable. It has to be more fancy, right? So a lot of us don't notice that we're in, basically cattle yards. So anyways, I've never met a vampire that I know of, but scientifically, in terms of biology, the science that we are aware of right now, this is definitely something which you can do. So, and because it is definitely something you could do, it's not really that hard to understand and that it would probably help people to live thousands of years longer than a normal person was if they're doing it in a very skilled way. That I would say, I would guess there's probably at least a dozen vampires on this planet who have been around for a long time, and there's probably been lots of other vampires, but not all of them are as skilled at staying alive for thousands of years. So anyways, of course, I don't know that for sure. I haven't met one. I am not a vampire. The original, I do eat plants, but I do not currently eat the stem cells of other humans. It is hard to think of a situation where that is viable ethically, except for, I think that, what's it called? The placenta? I think it's made up of some kind of neutral cells that aren't so much the mother's cells or even the baby cells, so the baby can kind of develop in its own way. And so it's kind of a neutral, and there are stem cells in there. So if that actually is, a valuable, if that actually is effective, I don't really see any downside to that, except morally anyway, except that, you would then be taking on the essence of the mother and the child, and therefore you would have to be careful about, where you're sourcing it, because this becomes a part of who you are. So anyways, I think ethically it could maybe be done, but I would say the way it's done by people on this planet who do that type of stuff, the blood drinking or the refined blood, that they're not doing it in an ethical way. And they're basically the people, or at least one of the groups of people, who are steering the direction of humanity. So all the bullshit that you see going on is at least partially coming from these people's involvement in a higher level dynamic of societies that we aren't aware of. We're not allowed to know about these things. So the vampires would be one of these groups of people who influence things, and currently not so much for the good. So anyways, there's some thoughts on vampires. Hope you enjoyed. See you later.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider sharing it. If you'd like to help me out in a more substantial way, you can learn how to do so at cahlen.org/gift. And if you'd like to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether publicly or privately, you can learn how to do so at cahlen.org/one-on-one. Thanks again for watching.